Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving right into exactly how the global market objectively measures the sustainability of the food that ends up on our tables. Specifically, we're looking at the meat, poultry, and dairy industry and how it's categorized under the SASB Sustainable Industry Classification System, or SICS for short, within the broader food and beverage sector. Let's get right into it.
But first, ask yourself this. How do we actually measure the sustainability of our food without just, taking a marketing department's word for it? If you want to compare two massive food giants fairly, how do you do it? Well, the answer lies in standardized data. It acts as a common language for the entire industry, because without it, we're really just comparing apples to, organically raised, pasture-fed oranges.
And that common language, it comes directly from the SASB standards, which are now actually under the stewardship of the International Sustainability Standards Board, or the ISSB. They give us the exact authority and framework we need here. This isn't just some niche set of guidelines, it's a globally recognized foundation that both investors and preparers use to pinpoint real, tangible sustainability-related risks.
So, the Sustainable Industry Classification System, or SICS, is our crucial blueprint today. Think of it as a framework that organizes incredibly dense, complicated sustainability metrics into a structured, comparable format based on a company's primary industry activities. It specifically zeroes in on the exact risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to impact a company's financial prospects.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start by decoding SICS and the industry itself. Then, we'll break things down into three logical pillars: earth and resources, people and product, and the animals. Finally, we'll look at why all this matters.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Decoding SICS in the Industry, and defining the FBMP classification.
When we look at this specific classification, the sheer scope is absolutely staggering. We're talking about massive, vertically integrated operations. These companies often manage the whole shebang, from the initial animal raising, all the way through slaughtering, processing, and finally, packaging. Plus, they rely heavily on contract or independent farmers to actually supply the animals. Because they control so much of that supply chain, their exposure to sustainability risks is incredibly broad.
Now, before we can even begin to judge a company's sustainability, they have to establish their sheer scale. To do this, the standard uses what are called activity metrics. Companies have to report the exact number of processing and manufacturing facilities they operate, along with the total amount of animal protein they produce by category, including what percentage is outsourced. By setting this baseline of scale, we can properly contextualize all the environmental and social data that comes next.
Moving right along to Section 2, Earth and Resources, the first pillar.
The standard draws a really fascinating contrast here between two massive sources of emissions. For this industry, the majority of direct Scope 1 greenhouse gas emissions actually come from the animals themselves, specifically through the release of methane during enteric fermentation, which, let's be real, is just the scientific way of saying cow burps, and, of course, from manure storage. On the flip side, we have energy management. Processing these animal products takes immense industrial power, so companies have to report their total gigajoules consumed and then break down exactly how much of that comes from the grid versus renewable sources.
Now, this specific figure, 40 to 80%, is absolutely critical. It represents the threshold for regions classified as having high baseline water stress by the World Resources Institute. Raising livestock and industrial processing are both incredibly water-intensive activities. So, if a company's facilities happen to operate in these stressed regions, the standard demands they meticulously report the exact percentage of their total water withdrawal and consumption that's occurring right there.
And hey, it's not just about the water coming in, it's also about what goes out. The standard requires companies to disclose the percentage of animal waste that is managed according to a strict nutrient management plan. This involves clear, mandated steps. You have the initial generation and collection of animal litter and manure, then safe wastewater handling and storage, and finally, proper land treatment and agronomic use. When you're dealing with confined animal feeding operations, these facilities have to manage immense amounts of concentrated waste just to prevent ecological contamination, and honestly, to avoid some severely costly regulatory fines.
All right, on to Section 3, People and Product. Because honestly, what good is meticulously tracked environmental data if the food itself isn't safe to eat, or the workplace isn't safe for the people working there?
Here we get to see how the SICS standard balances proactive and reactive food safety metrics. Proactively, companies have to report their non-conformance rates under the Global Food Safety Initiative, breaking down the major issues that pose significant health risks versus the minor ones. But reactively, If things go wrong, they are required to report the brutal financial fallout. That means tracking the total number and weight of product recalls, whether they were voluntary or mandated by regulators, plus any markets that have outright banned their products due to sanitary measures.
Of course, the safety of the product is deeply tied to the safety of the people making it. The meat, poultry, and dairy industry operates in fast-paced, loud, and hazard-heavy environments. So the standard requires companies to disclose their efforts to assess and mitigate very specific risks. We're talking about musculoskeletal disorders, exposure to chemicals and pathogens, traumatic injuries from heavy machinery, and even acute and chronic respiratory conditions.
To measure these workplace hazards objectively, the standard uses the number 200,000. This is the baseline number of hours, which basically represents 100 full-time workers over a single year, used to calculate the total recordable incident rate, or TIIR. And here is the real kicker. Companies have to calculate this rate not just for their direct on-payroll employees, but also for any contract employees they supervise. So there are absolutely no loopholes for outsourcing danger.
That brings us to Section 4, our final thematic pillar, the animals.
The standard draws a really strict line in the sand when it comes to antibiotic usage. Companies must report the percentage of animal production by weight that actually received antibiotics. But they have to strictly separate those on the World Health Organization's list of medically important antibiotics, meaning drugs that are also used in human medicine, from those strictly used for animals. This impartial split is super important. It allows investors to objectively gauge public health risks like antibiotic-resistant bacteria right alongside the potential benefits to production yields.
The standard also tackles animal housing because, let's face it, public perception of animal welfare can dramatically shift market share and invite serious regulatory pressure. So, SCIS translates these often subjective views on animal care into hard, comparable percentages. Companies are required to report exactly what percentage of their pork is produced without the use of gestation crates and what percentage of their shell egg sales come from cage-free environments.
But the standard actually reaches far beyond a company's own factory walls. Companies are held accountable for their external suppliers too. They have to disclose the percentage of their animal feed coming from those high water stress regions we mentioned earlier, and how many of their suppliers are actually implementing recognized conservation plans. Crucially, they must lay out their strategy to manage the risks that climate change presents to their feed sourcing and livestock supply.
Section 5, why this matters and the real-world impact of SICS. The answer to why this matters is right here in the foundational text of the standard itself. The entire goal is disclosing information about sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the entity's cash flows, its access to finance or cost of capital. Tracking gestation crates, water stress, or pathogen exposure isn't just some marketing or PR exercise. These are cold, hard operational realities that directly dictate a company's financial survival and profitability.
By forcing companies to speak this common, standardized language, SICS pulls back the curtain on the meat, poultry, and dairy industry. It allows investors, and frankly all of us, to see the true cost of production. So I'll leave you with this. As these standardized metrics continue to shift global markets and demand greater transparency, what hidden risks in your food supply chain do you think will be revealed next? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking the hard questions about the data behind your food.